So we are now recording. See if this wants to cooperate. Okay, so welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Quinn Walcott. I'm the Business and Program Manager at the Summit Historical Society. We are a member organization, so we are supported by you. We are so happy to have Nancy Kerrigan-Smith with us today for her presentation on First Ladies and Racial Equality. Nancy retired as the director of the Presidential Materials Division of the National Archive. She continues her work as a First Lady scholar and author. This presentation will be about 45 minutes. At this time, please turn off your camera and mic, although you can keep your camera on if you would like, but if you could turn off your mic, that would be wonderful. We will take questions at the end of the presentation, so please hold them till we ask for questions. And without further ado, Nancy Kerrigan-Smith.
Well, welcome to everyone. This is my second talk, and it's really on First Ladies and civil rights. And what happened was, of course, with George Floyd's tragic death in 2019, it really made me and two of my friends who are First Lady scholars want to write an article for CNN on that was focused on the tradition of First Ladies and civil rights. Was it a good tradition? Was it bad? And also that there were three First Ladies who I will give more attention to today. Eleanor Roosevelt, Lady Bird Johnson, and Michelle Obama, whose lives were threatened because of what they did on civil rights. So as we start out, I have given you this wonderful quote of Lady Bird Johnson, which was from her Whistle Stop tour that I will talk about later. And she said this in New Orleans in 1964, and I've edited a lot, but basically it says, "We are testing as a nation whether we shall move forward with an understanding of each other or whether we shall move backwards. This is, I believe, a contest between the positive and the negative." And it is so relevant for today, that quote, and I sent it to so many people. When I edited a little bit, it lost a little in the understanding, but Quinn, we can go to the next quote, to the next slide. I'm sorry. I'm just going to run through the earlier First Ladies a little bit. The subject of First Ladies and civil rights is a complicated one. It started with Martha Washington, who became First Lady in May of 1989 in Philadelphia. And she, while she fulfilled her role with great dignity and warmth, she was a Virginia plantation owner, and she brought enslaved servants into the White House, and seven First Ladies, starting with her, brought their enslaved servants into the White House. Our second First Lady, Abigail Adams, however, was a strong advocate of abolition, saying of Southerners, how could they reconcile human bondage with the ideology of freedom that Americans had fought for? When we can go to the next slide. I'm going to go through just quickly, as I said, some First Ladies. Mary Lincoln, who was from Kentucky, had relatives in the Confederate Army, but she was a strong supporter of abolition, and she was called a traitor, even though she was a strong supporter. Lucy Hayes was an abolitionist. Helen Nellie Taft was an early advocate of racial equality and kindergartens for African American children. Ellen Wilson helped improve the terrible living conditions of African Americans in the District of Columbia. And Lou Henry Hoover caused a firestorm when she invited to a White House tea Jessie DePriest, who was the wife of Oscar DePriest, an African American congressman from Illinois. And that's just a real quick run through because, as I said, today we're focusing on, next slide, please, Quinn. Eleanor Roosevelt was really amazing. Not only did she bring in the model of an activist first lady, but she consistently fought racial discrimination and prejudice, and in fact was a stronger advocate than her husband, Franklin Roosevelt. And I really don't have time today to give you all the examples, but some of them are, she joined and addressed the 1936 annual NAACP and National Urban League conventions. She advocated for anti-lynching legislation, supporting multiple anti-segregation campaigns. She co-chaired the National Committee to abolish the poll tax, which was really discriminatory to African Americans. And she convened at the White House the National Conference of Negro Women, as it was called at the time. But there is a particular event that she is famous for, and Quinn, let's go to the next slide. In February of 1939, she wrote a letter resigning from the Daughters of the American Revolution because they denied the use of Constitution Hall to a world famous opera singer, Marian Anderson, because she was African American. So afterwards, she worked behind the scenes with Interior Secretary Harold Ickes to arrange for Anderson to sing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And it became one of the great early events in civil rights history. And we are very fortunate today to have audio visual in the next slide of Marian Anderson singing on the Lincoln Memorial to 75,000 people. So let's go to that, Quinn.
Genius draws no color line. And so it is fitting that Marian Anderson should raise her voice in tribute to the noble Lincoln, whom mankind will ever honor. Miss Marian Anderson.
You can see how huge the crowd is. I really wanted to bring the audio visual today because not many people really realize how huge an event this was. And that first ladies can often do an event that has huge ramifications. Eleanor Roosevelt spoke, well, before I leave that, I want to say that it's interesting. Marian Anderson the night before was really wondering what she had gotten into and whether she even wanted to do this. She had no idea of how huge an event it would be. Eleanor Roosevelt continued to speak out repeatedly on the injustice of racism, saying that democracy for African Americans was a crucial part of democracy for the United States, and that one of the main destroyers of freedom is our attitude toward the colored race, unquote. She continued her strong actions on this issue even after being first lady, but because of her strong support and actions in trying to end racism, the Ku Klux Klan placed a bounty on her head. So let's go to the next slide. Now, don't hit on it. First, I want to set this up. From Eleanor Roosevelt, we're going to Lady Bird Johnson, who was another incredible supporter, a strong believer in civil rights and legislative action. Her most visible support was in 1964 in her, Quinn, can we go back? In her groundbreaking solo whistle-stop trip. It broke many precedents because it was the first time a First Lady campaign on her own for her husband, who was Lyndon Johnson, was running in 1964. The Whistle Stop campaign was planned and run by three women, Lady Bird Johnson and her press secretary, Liz Carpenter, and Bess Abel, her social secretary, all of whom were from the South. And President Johnson was very supportive. To set this up, in 1964, in July of 64, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had been passed, and many people thought Lyndon Johnson would lose the presidency and lose the South. And Mrs. Johnson felt strongly that she was going to go down to the South, to little towns, not big cities, in most cases, and talk to Southerners and let them know she cared and why she supported civil rights, but that to move forward, the South needed to accept it. And she said, I have a strong sentimental family deep tie to the South, and I thought that the South was getting a bad rap from the nation and indeed the world. It was painted as a bastion of ignorance and all sorts of ugly things. It was my country, and although I knew I couldn't be that persuasive, at least I could let them talk to them in a language they would understand. So Mrs. Johnson recorded her thoughts from her diary while she was planning her Whistle Stop tour, which was 4 days in October from Alexandria, Virginia, and ended up in New Orleans. And let's go ahead and play this.
And yet now, in this decade and increasing, there is a drawing apart of the South from the national life. And every time the rest of the nation makes one more snide joke about corn pone or rednecks, the defenses of the South go up more angrily. The dividing abyss widens, and the curtain becomes thicker and murkier. It is partly the South wanting to pull away, and partly the rest of the nation misunderstanding, yes, even laughing it away. None of this is right or is good for the future of our country. I get letters from my friends down South who say, Nobody pays any attention to us anymore. If we come to Washington, we get a cold shoulder or no attention. If there's such a feeling in the South, what do I think I and my little trip into the South can do about it? Nothing much. Just sort of to say that whatever your feelings now and for the years to come, the South, to this Democratic candidate for president and to his wife, is a respected and valued and beloved part of the country.
Now it is 1964.
It was a very courageous thing on her part. People were afraid for Lyndon Johnson to go down to the South. And of course, for Lady Bird, Linda and Lucy accompanied her on the train along with a whole bevy of reporters and Liz and Beth Sable. And in many towns, they were met with boos and curses. But Mrs. Johnson would always hold up her hand and say, "You've had your say, now I would like to have my say." They had to run a train, an engine ahead of the whistle-stop train because the FBI and Secret Service had gotten threats that her train would be bombed. And so they ran a train 15 minutes ahead. And it was quite an act of courage on her part and an extremely successful trip because they thought before the trip was taken that Lyndon Johnson would lose the South in 1964. He actually carried 3 states, and incredibly, her message, because of national TV, was elevated and encouraged the support and implementation of civil rights. They estimate at least 500,000 people saw one of her talks, one of her 47 talks on the Whistle Stop campaign, and it got huge coverage. So it was a real act of courage. Her life was threatened, and it was a very successful trip for her and for the president, who joined her in the end at New Orleans. We can go to the next slide. I am just running through certainly Betty Ford through Michelle Obama. There are a series of things that those first ladies did for civil rights. In the case of Hillary Clinton, she did a lot for civil rights. She focused on international human rights for women and is famous for her comments in Beijing at the Beijing conference when she said, "Women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights." But Barbara and Laura Bush were 2 first ladies who led by example, and Barbara Bush made a very strong visual point for civil rights and AIDS in a picture that some of you may remember when she held a 2-year-old African-American baby, encouraging federal support for AIDS. And I don't know whether many people know that First Lady Laura Bush hosted a White House symposium on the Harlem Renaissance, demonstrating the importance of culture, which has been key in advancing civil rights. So then we will go to the next slide, Quinn, which is Michelle Obama was really a historic first. She was the first African-American first lady, and she had ancestors who were enslaved and who were enslavers. Her maternal great-great-great-grandmother was a slave who was enslaved by her paternal great grandfather, no, her paternal maternal great grandfather and her paternal great grandfather was also a slave. She actually did not know this till a woman named Rachel Swarms wrote a book on her ancestry. So as First Lady, she found this out. She used her background to ensure that the White House was more inclusive and to be a role model for minorities, particularly young African-American women. And there is a wonderful example of that. Mrs. Obama, in her first year as First Lady, wanted to appear on the cover of Vogue. And President Obama, the president's staff did not want her appearing on Vogue because they thought Vogue was too high fashion and gave the wrong impression. And she insisted and said, you know, you've got a lot of brain power and you guys need to figure out how to play the positive out of this than the negative. But she did appear in those wonderful pictures in that pink dress. And what she argued was that she was the only African-American First Lady who could ever appear on the cover of, who had appeared on the cover of Vogue. And she was trying to give particularly young African-American women a positive role model. So she addressed being First Lady, as all of these women do in their unique way, but hers was a particularly unique background. She came from a very modest background, and she was told by her high school guidance counselor that she could not get into Princeton, which even today she will talk about how negative that made her feel and that it made her try that much harder. And she stressed to young people constantly about the transformative nature and importance of education. And she, if you study speeches of First Ladies, she talked to younger people in a much more motherly and sometimes critical way than any other First Lady ever had. And she could do that because of where she had come from. And the next clip, Quinn, we are going to hear her remarks on the 50th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, which was the Supreme Court ruling that ended separate but equal by saying separate but equal in schools was not equal. Let's go ahead and play the clip.
When it comes to getting an education, too many of our young people just can't be bothered. Today, instead of walking miles every day to school, they're sitting on couches for hours, playing video games, watching TV. Instead of dreaming of being a teacher or a lawyer or a business leader, they're fantasizing about being a baller or a rapper. Right now, 1 in 3 African-American students are dropping out of high school. Only 1 in 5 African-Americans between the ages of 25 and 29 has gotten a college degree. 1 in 5. But let's be very clear, today, getting an education is as important, if not more important, than it was back when this university was founded. As my husband has said often, please stand up and reject the slander that says a black child with a book is trying to act white. Reject that. In short, be an example of excellence for the next generation. and do everything you can to help them understand the power and purpose of a good education.
The way she talked there is very unique for a first lady, and you can hear that she was exhorting them to really strive and work for education. And Michelle Obama's speeches are very interesting at Bowie State. And whenever she's talking to younger people, it's not all, oh, you're so great. It's like, this is the dream and this is what you need to do to reach that dream. And of course, her life was the Secret Service handled multiple threats on her life. So that these three, Eleanor Roosevelt, Lady Bird Johnson, Michelle Obama, were really are a focus of a piece that I and two of other scholars on First Ladies, Anita McBride and Diana Carlin, did for a CNN opinion piece, which was three First Ladies who risked their lives to advance civil rights, and really left a lasting legacy and a challenge. Let's go, Quinn, to the last slide. Again, the First Ladies, in their own words, one of the main destroyers, Eleanor Roosevelt, said, of freedom is our attitude toward the colored race. And Lady Bird Johnson on, we're testing as a nation whether we shall move forward with understanding of each other or whether we shall move backward into a national climate of fear and distrust and dislike. This is, I believe, a contest between the positive and the negative. And Michelle Obama, I wake up every day in a house built by slaves. When she said that, the White House Historical Association, that comment got such huge attention that the White House Historical Association did a special learning packet on slavery in the White House and enslaved people around in the area of Washington, D.C. But to go back to Lady Bird's statement, when we wrote that CNN opinion piece, I had some friends who picked that up and put it on their email because it is so relevant for today. It was said in 1964, but it is still, unfortunately, the challenge. And in the clip you saw of Michelle Obama, she's basically saying she's in Kansas City at the 50th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. And in that speech, she's saying, well, there was a lot of success with the Civil Rights Act and with that ruling that the schools were going somewhat backward. And she was challenging people to not let that happen. And then, of course, Eleanor Roosevelt worked so hard to facilitate the advancement of civil rights and race, and certainly as she left First Lady, her work for the UN, she always continued doing that, as Michelle Obama does with her center, and Lady Bird Johnson continued. So that's basically the formal presentation, and I would be delighted to take any questions.
Hi, I'll start with the question. Hi, Nancy.
Hi.
That was wonderful. I was not aware of Lady Bird Johnson's Whistle Stop tour, And what, I guess wanted to hear a little bit more about what was the hope that, what was she trying to accomplish by it? Was it to get support for the Civil Rights Act, or just also to help the South understand, to be able to show that they were listening to the South?
It was really to go down to the South as a Southerner and try and talk to them about the importance of the New South and moving ahead. And as Lyndon Johnson said, racism was an albatross around their neck. Of course, it was an albatross and remains an albatross around many people's and many places neck. But really, Kennedy and politicians before had somewhat given up on the South, and she didn't want to do that. And she wanted to push the importance of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is still today the seminal piece of legislation. That and the 1965 Voting Rights Act are two of the most seminal pieces of legislation to advance civil rights. Although there is increasingly a trend to roll back some of the things that the Voting Rights Act tried to change. But she was trying to go down there to talk to the South and encourage them. And she did have a real positive effect. It was interesting. She called all the Southern senators, and she made a funny comment that Strom Thurmond just couldn't be available. But it was amazing how many of them did join her. Hale Boggs did join her in New Orleans. Many of them did decide to join her because her train trip was so popular, and it did change minds and open minds because she was so polite and so persuasive in the way she did it. But certainly was also to help Lyndon Johnson. I mean, everything that Leggy Berg did, they were a real team. And so, but this was something she did on her own. And what I worked at the beginning of my career, I was an archivist at the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library, and I actually got to know Mrs. Johnson and process some of her files. And I interviewed her, and she told me, you know, Nancy, anyone who thinks that Lyndon picked what I concentrated on, which was really civil rights, Head Start, and of course, beautification, conservation, she said, no, that's wrong. He would encourage me, but I picked what I wanted to concentrate on, what I loved and wanted to do. And he certainly did not tell her to go down to the South at such a dangerous time. But once she decided, he was very supportive of the trip. Any other questions?
Nancy, this is Sally.
Hi, Sally.
Hi. My eyes went away, so I can't tell with the camera, but if you can hear my voice, I really appreciate both your first talk with the video clips that really helps bring people to life. And particularly from my accent, I'm a Texan, and I lived in Dallas when I was in the 9th grade when Kennedy was assassinated. And that's very much a part of my upbringing, and you know, was a real telling moment, you know, for someone in the 9th grade. But it is very much a part of the evolution in the South that we went through desegregation. I fought through my church group, a Dallas citywide church group, when a friend of mine was in love with a black man with a white girl. And we went through this. So to hear it from the perspective of the first ladies is really a large part even of my life. And I can't thank you enough for putting it in that perspective, because here's the first lady of the United States, and we're living somewhat of a parallel life down at, a human person level. So in 87, I was hired at Colonial Williamsburg, and I started working under a grant from AT&T to interpret the free and enslaved Blacks that were in Williamsburg at that time, 87. So 64 to 87. And then to bring it all the way up, obviously, that's when we worked together in the DC area up to Michelle Obama. Really, thank you. Just thank you for highlighting those specific areas. And I adored Lady Bird Johnson anyway.
Well, you're more than welcome. I loved her. I think that it is very important to make history more fulsome. These are not things we've heard. And first ladies could either be a mirror of their times or a leader. And these particular three were leaders, but no one is trying to cover up that certainly there were first ladies. Martha Washington was a wonderful, dignified first lady, but she came from a Southern plantation environment, as did 7 other first ladies, and they brought enslaved people into the White House. And there were other first ladies who certainly did not facilitate race relations. So it's reflected. It's interesting to me, Sally, as you know, I went to the University of Texas at Austin. And, I went in 1968. I was a swimmer on their swim team, but in 1968, and the University of Texas is a huge campus, and very few people can stay in the university, the housing. And so I stayed in a private dorm. Unfortunately, all the private dorms in 1968 in Austin, Texas were segregated. I mean, they did not allow African Americans or Mexican Americans in the dorms. I did not know that because I came from the East, and my uncle was a professor at the University of Texas and got my dorm. But I had a friend over to their, every Sunday we had a steak luncheon, and her name was Esterline Moya. And afterwards, the head mistress called me and she said, "Was your friend Mexican American?" And I said, "Well, I assume Esterline is, but what difference does that make?" And she goes, "Well, she's really not allowed in the dorm." And I go, "Well, no, that my parents and I are very liberal." And I said, "So if you want to keep me in the dorm, you can call them." But I'm going to bring who I want to bring, and you're going to be polite. And Lyndon Johnson helped that environment by taking in to the best club in Austin at the time, which still exists today, is called the Headliners. And he took an African American in, and no one would tell President Johnson
Right.
do that. So he integrated that club. But that is Austin, Texas, which, as Sally knows, is much more liberal part of Texas than Dallas.
Right.
And my husband was born and raised in Oxford, Mississippi. So, there has been a huge evolution. But part of what we're trying to do in this presentation and talk is say that history is somewhat cyclical. It goes in a cycle. And right now, the nation really needs to re-examine. We don't want to go backwards. And there's so much more that we can do, and that these first ladies who were courageous give us a real example of things that you can do to improve the situation. Hopefully.
Well, and our years of experience.
Yes, yes. But you know, one thing on audiovisual, as an archivist, I love the records, and that Marian Anderson singing clip, which really always makes me emotional. I mean, it's so incredible. It actually isn't. I talked to the director of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Library, and he did not think they had it. I pulled it off of YouTube, but most people don't realize 75,000 people. That was probably the biggest civil rights event before Martin Luther King's I Dream speech. And you saw how crowded the mall was. And very few people have ever seen that clip or experience what you experience, you know, when you see that clip.
Very powerful.
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely love that clip. Now, if I'm correct, Nancy, Flair is an ongoing project that you're involved in, correct?
Yes.
Would you like to talk a bit more about what you're doing and how this project is going forward?
Thank you for mentioning that.
Of course.
With 6 other First Lady scholars, including Anita McBride, Myra Gooten, Diana Carlin, and some others, are setting up a FLAIR, which is First Ladies Association for Research and Education. Because amazingly, you have the American Historical Association, you have the Organization of American Historians, but you have no society that brings all the different disciplines or people who just love to hear about First Ladies together. So we are we are affiliated with American University's First Ladies Initiative, which my friend Anita McBride heads up. And we are starting to have someone work on our website. We're going out for membership. So I'll probably send all of you an invitation to join. And we are very excited. We're going to do podcasts. I did do a podcast for American POTUS. If anyone's interested, it's still on up, and it was on First Ladies, and I did that in last year. But we are going to do podcasts. We are going to do all sorts of, we're going to have a First Ladies cocktail hour every so often, just so people who admire First Ladies or want to know about them or who do research can join, because it's amazing how people don't realize what all is going on. And we're very excited about it. We feel like it's sort of a legacy. I will say, I was one of the early proponents of scholarship on First Ladies, but in 1984 at the Ford Library and Museum, the museum in Grand Rapids, it was the first conference ever on First Ladies, not attached to their, but on First Ladies. And Lewis Gould, he was formerly a professor at the University of Texas, wrote a book in the 1990s on Lady Bird Johnson and environmentalism. He justified in the preface why he was writing a book on a First Lady and a substantive issue. To this day, forget the biographies. I mean, the biographies are important and the memoirs, but there are about 2 books on First Ladies and substantive issues, with all the substantive things they've done, like Laura Bush with Afghan women, Hillary Clinton for international women's rights. It is just amazing. Barbara Bush for literacy, Laura Bush for literacy, and the foundations they formed, Lady Bird Johnson's Wildflower Center. So we are really trying to show people how relevant. And the thing that's very interesting about First Ladies is while they are affected by events, as Laura Bush became much more public than she probably would have because of 9/11, and she was sort of the consoler of the nation. But they can choose more what they're interested in and their passions to work on. And we're seeing, of course, with Dr. Biden, a first lady for the first time ever, who is teaching, continuing to teach, and who is very vocal about education and what she wants to do. And so they can pick their agendas a little bit more, although those agendas often are affected by things that their husbands do. But they have done so much worthy on their own. That's something that this group is trying to, they're not just an appendage to their husband. And it's a remarkable group of unelected people who do so much, who, as Mrs. Johnson said, was elected by one person, their husbands. And they have remarkably stepped up in a way that if you compare to other countries, no other country in the world expects of their spouse the role that U.S. first ladies play. Do some first ladies lead? Oh, sure, but they don't expect it, and it's up to that first lady. But here, the public has huge expectations. I remember when Laura Bush became first lady, they asked her, well, what model was she following? Was she following Barbara Bush or Lady Bird Johnson, who Laura Bush really also loved? And she said, I'm Laura Bush. And it was interesting. Michelle Obama was asked the exact same question and came up with almost the same answer. You know, there are many first ladies who I am very favorable about, but I'm going to be Michelle Obama. So that is, in a lot of ways, history has, as it has bypassed African Americans and their role in our country and their achievements. It has bypassed first ladies, partly because they're women, and the achievements and the lasting legacy of what they're doing. And we're trying to make that, correct that with this group. Which was
Now
a lot.
Now I got a question passed to me by Jane. I don't know which one of you asked the question. So this is Jane's question. Is the FLAIR project related at all to a program I saw on C-SPAN? Did I get that right? Yeah. Okay.
No, we love the C-SPAN programs, but the FLAIR project is to set up a formal association and network and offer people things and then spotlight things like the programs that recently there have been quite a few programs on first ladies. There's a brand new book coming out on Lady Bird Johnson called Plain Speaking, which is based on the oral diaries that she generated the White House diary from. So there are a lot of exciting things going on. And the White House Historical Association is having a huge conference in May on presidential sites, and they have devoted this year to first ladies. And I will be speaking at that along with many other people. So it's I would say collaborative, but it's not associated with.
Do we have any other questions for Nancy today? And if you think of anything in the future, you can always send it to us at Summit Historical, and we at the Summit Historical Society at our email, and we will send it on to Nancy to get those answers for you. So if that is all the questions there are, we'll close out today. So thank you so much, Nancy, for coming and talking with us again. And we're so happy that you're able to join us today. And thank you for joining us, all of you today. If you are not already a member, please consider becoming a member today, as we are a member organization and we are sponsored by you. The links to join or to donate are in the chat already. So if you would like to access those, you're more than welcome to. I also included the link to get to our events. We have a very cool event that's happening next week, same time on Wednesday, and that will be with Mary Ellen Gilliland, and she'll be talking about historic women in Summit County. So thank you again for joining us, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy.
Nancy.
Bye, Sally.
Bye.
Bye, Quinn.
Bye.
Thank you.